Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today for a unique collaboration between two leading nonpartisan nonprofit research and policy institutions, the Washington-based Brookings Institution and the Institute for National Security Studies in Tel Aviv. My name is Shira Efron, and I'm a visiting research fellow at the INSS and have the honor of moderating the discussion today with our distinguished experts from both institutions. Today's topic is also unique, with a focus on North Korea and the Middle East. Here in the Middle East, we rarely think of North Korea as an important actor, but actually North Korea has been active in the region for decades. It has sold weapons, collaborated with different countries on military technology, and assisted Syria and Libya with their nuclear programs. It's clear that from North Korea's end, the Middle East provides a source of revenue and alliances and international ties. But beyond revenue and ties, what does North Korea leader Kim Jong Un want in the Middle East? What kind of impact North Korea has had in the region? How has the North Korean nuclear experience informed Iran's efforts in that area? And what is common and different between the counter-proliferation strategies against North Korea and Iran? To address these and other questions, I can't think of a better group of experts than those with us today. I'll introduce them briefly and transition over to them for opening remarks and subsequently a discussion, and we encourage audience questions, of course. So starting with Dr. Jung Pak, is a senior fellow and the SK Korea Foundation Chair in Korea Studies at Brookings. She's the author of a very new book, Becoming Kim Jong Un, a former CIA's officer insight into North Korea's enigmatic young dictator. As the title of her book suggests, she was previously at CIA and held senior positions also at the Office of Director of National Intelligence. Sima Shine is a senior research fellow at INSS. For most of her career, she served in the Israeli intelligence community, and her last position was head of research and evaluation division in the Mossad. After her retirement from Mossad, Shine served as deputy head of strategic affairs in Israel's National Security Council, and then in the Ministry of Strategic Affairs, where she was deputy director and in charge of the Iran file. And I think clearly Sima is by far one of Israel's most important experts and voices on the Iranian topic. Bob Einhorn, there's a very long and distinguished career. I'll try to be brief. He's a senior fellow at Brookings. He focuses on arms control, non-proliferation, and regional security issues. Before joining Brookings in 2013, Bob served in the US Department of State. He was a special advisor for non-proliferation and arms control, which led him to play a leading role in the formulation and execution of US policy toward Iran's nuclear program. He's held several governmental positions before and worked in other think tanks in Washington. And finally, last but not least, Major General Amos Javin is the executive director of INSS. He served in the IDF for 40 years, including as the chief of military intelligence between 2006 and 2010. I'm mentioning the years because they're relevant for our discussion. Under his leadership, the IDF hit the Cube near Deir al-Azor in Syria in 2007, shortly before it became an active nuclear reactor. Amos also brings a different practitioner experience. He accumulated over 5,000 flight hours and flew more than 250 combat missions behind enemy lines, including in the Yom Kippur War, the First Lebanon War, and the destruction of the Ozir nuclear reactor in Iraq in 1981. Amos will conclude the discussion in the end and provide his insight. Jung, Sima, Bob, thank you for joining us. Jung, let's start with you. You recently wrote a book and an article in Foreign Affairs entitled What Kim Wants. So what does he want in general, and in particular, what does he want in the Middle East?
Well, thank you. Thanks to INSS and for Brookings for putting this together. I'm really so pleased to be with my my colleague Bob and to be with you, Ms. Shine and Major General Yadlin. I'm going to talk about what Kim wants from the Middle East, but I want to take a big picture first of why Kim has nuclear weapons in the first place. North Korea has developed nuclear weapons for deterrence, coercive diplomacy, and strategic relevance and prestige. A country founder, Kim Il-sung, first entertained the idea in the 1960s, and his son, Kim Jong Un, developed them and bestowed a fledgling nuclear program to the current leader, Kim Jong Un. Kim 3.0 has accelerated the country's nuclear weapons program, embedded them into the constitution, further entrenching them into the North's and his own identity and brand. Kim Jong Un has conducted 4 of the North's 6 nuclear tests and expanded the size and sophistication of his ballistic missile forces, from short range to intercontinental range to those launched from sea-based platforms. Kim has also tested 4 times more missiles than his grandfather and father combined. The North Korean bombs are now much more powerful as well. The last test in September of 2017 was about 10 times bigger than the one dropped by the United States on Hiroshima in 1945. To put together these nuclear weapons, the missiles especially, are now more diverse in their ranges. They're more mobile, more reliable, and more dangerous. And the regime aims to ensure that it has preemptive and second strike survivable capabilities. Kim has matched these demonstrations with muscular rhetoric. The regime has threatened to attack South Korea, has also threatened a preemptive nuclear attack against the United States, declared the Korean War armistice null and void, and engaged in a war of words with the US President Donald Trump in 2017 that sparked fears about a military conflict spiraling into a nuclear conflagration. Despite these threats and these demonstrations, the regime has claimed, as it has over many years, that it will be a responsible nuclear weapons power. Kim, in his 2018 New Year's speech, declared, quote, "Our republic will not use nuclear weapons unless its sovereignty is encroached upon by any aggressive hostile forces with nukes." So essentially a defensive measure. The summits of 2018 and 2019, 3 meetings with President Trump, 5 with Xi Jinping, 3 with Moon Jae-in of South Korea, and 1 with Vladimir Putin, supported Kim's desire to be seen as a respectable statesman. Yet summit diplomacy and the legitimacy it garnered for Kim eclipsed the reason for why North Korea has been shunned and sanctioned by the international community in the first place. These sanctions have been put in place to prevent the transfer of knowledge of weapons of mass destruction and materials from transiting into and out of North Korea, and to choke the financial avenues that fund these programs. These include bans on trade of North Korean arms and military equipment, dual-use technologies and machinery, and the freezing of assets of key actors involved in the nuclear weapons and ballistic missile program. The counter-proliferation sanctions are critical to slowing not just North Korea's weapons programs, but also that of other actors, including states in the Middle East. Pyongyang has a long history of military cooperation in the Middle East and North Africa, including partners like Iran, Syria, Iraq, Egypt, and Yemen, with ties to Iran and Syria being among the strongest and the most enduring. But these relationships are transactional rather than strategic or broad-based, and are driven primarily by Pyongyang's desire to generate and maintain revenue streams, diversify their ties to the outside world, amplify their coercive diplomacy, and facilitate North Korean illicit activities in a relatively permissive environment. The Syria relationship goes back to the days of Kim Il-sung in the 1960s, when the two countries sought each other out in their common struggle against the imperialist West. North Korea also supplied men and materiel to support Syria in the Six-Day War and the Yom Kippur War. In the 1990s and into the 2000s, the US government assessments indicated that Syria and North Korea, including on missile production technologies. A declassified CIA document from 1995 indicated that Syria's copies of Soviet-designed Scud missiles are present throughout the Middle East, including Syria and Iran. The cooperation also included the building of a nuclear reactor, which I know my colleagues will be following up with and will describing in greater detail. Ties to Iran date from 1973, when the two countries established diplomatic ties with their shared view of the world as a hostile place. The heyday of cooperation with Tehran was in the 1980s and the 1990s as Iran looked for cheap weapons, missiles, and training as it fought its wars against Iraq, and while North Korea looked to improve its access to energy sources after losing cheap oil from the Soviet Union. Other than the nuclear reactor that was destroyed by Israel in 2007, US government assessments have maintained for years that there's no credible evidence of nuclear cooperation between North Korea and Syria and North Korea and Iran or other actors in the Middle East. And even ballistic missile cooperation has petered out over the years as countries' needs have been met by indigenized expertise through reverse engineering or other sources of arms. The Director of National Intelligence, my former boss, James Clapper, told the Senate Armed Services Committee in 2016, of late, there has not been a great deal of interchange between Iran and North Korea. 2 years earlier, he had testified that Iran is not currently receiving assistance with its ICBM program. Since 2013, the Department of Defense reports to Congress have echoed similar assessments. Competition from cheap but better, more advanced material from China is also probably hampering a more lucrative and robust relationship. From 2013 to 2017, China was the world's fourth largest arms supplier, selling military equipment worth more than $10 billion to the Middle East. But all of this does not mean that we should relax our vigilance. In fact, you can make the argument that it was our vigilance and our worries and concerns about cooperation that has led to the it has contributed a large part to the petering out of this relationship. A 2018 United Nations report gave new information about cargo from 2 years earlier in 2016. North Korea was reportedly carrying 30,000 rocket-propelled grenades worth $26 million to Egypt's main weapons conglomerate. So is a bustling arms bazaar for covert sales of North Korean missiles and military hardware. Another UN report from February of 2008 said North Korea is shipping supplies to Syria that could be used in the production of chemical weapons. That included acid-resistant tiles, valves, and thermometers. And North Korean missile technicians have been spotted working in known chemical weapons and missile facilities inside Syria. And the UN report also noted that there have been 40 previously unreported shipments of missile parts and missiles and materials. In March of 2019, the UN panel of experts reported that two designated North Korean arms entities, COMID and Green Pine, were extremely active in Iran. There were active investigations into who is exactly at the North Korean embassy undercover in Tehran, and that two North Korean reps were monitored flying between Tehran and Dubai more than 262 times between 2014 and 2016, according to another UN account. In 2016, the US Treasury Department designated Iranian officials for engaging in ballistic missile procurement in collaboration with sanctioned North Korean entities. The 2019 annual threat assessment, which the DNI delivers to Congress, Iran is not currently undertaking key nuclear weapons development activities necessary to produce a nuclear device. But its officials have publicly threatened to resume nuclear activities, and the regime is probably maintaining the option of start these activities. Going forward, we're likely to see continued North Korean attempts to sell weapons and potentially nuclear weapons. And the key factor is, will the North Koreans get away with it? The Director of National Intelligence, Clapper, as well as the Secretary of Defense, have all expressed awareness of the possibilities of increased cooperation and possible transfer of nuclear technologies. And so this will always be a key concern. And given the coronavirus lockdown and the border lockdowns in North Korea, as well as the ongoing economic stressors as a result of sanctions placed on North Korea, the North Korean government is likely to continue to try to drum up business in the Middle East. And I would assess that if nuclear components, which would be at a different level of provocative actions in these transfers of technology, bombs, or knowledge, the North Koreans will probably prefer to deal with trusted, long-established partners rather than to non-state or unknown actors. So let me stop there and turn it over to you, back to you, Shira.
Thank you very much, Jung. We have a technical glitch, so we will wait for Bob to come back online. But in the meantime, Sima, based on what we heard, and I think the big picture from Pyongyang, it's very hard not to try to compare between the Iranian and the North Korean cases. What are the similarities? What are the differences? And what lessons, possibly, in your assessment, has Iran learned from the North Korea case?
Thank you, Shira. As was mentioned before, let me say some words as the background for the relations between these two countries, Iran and North Korea, and then something how does Iran look upon the example of the North Korean affair with the US, the nuclear issue, how it protected it and brought Trump to enter into the territory of North Korea. So first of all, let me remind, as you have mentioned, John, before, that the military ties between Iran and North Korea are ongoing for many, many years. They were concentrated on specifically on the nuclear, on the missile technology. And in response, Iran was paying sometimes in cash, but most of the time with oil. We didn't know, and as was mentioned before, there were big question marks whether there is any cooperation in the nuclear field. We don't know exactly. We could suspect, but there is one major difference. If we try to compare Syria and the Iran, there is one major difference. Syria needed North Korea to build for her the nuclear reactor. Iran doesn't need any such support from North Korea. It is a country that was building its own nuclear reactor according to Russian blueprints, but they were doing it on their own. But of course, there might have been an interest in Iran in a different information in enrichment, specifically in testings. And there were, from time to time, there was an information suggesting that Iranian officials were participating in nuclear attempts that in exercises that were done in North Korea. We don't have, as far as I know, a confirmation for these reports, but they suggest that Iran wanted to see how it is conducted because Iran was not there and is not there yet now. Now, as I said, when we compare Syria and Iran, Syria wanted a turnkey project from North Korea, and the Koreans were doing it in Syria in a secret way. A group of technicians were building under the ground this reactor. Iran always wanted to do the things on its own, not to be dependent on anyone from the outside. Now, in the past, we believed that there are limits on the proliferation of North Korea. They needed this desperately money, and economic support, but there were limits. Probably there were limits. That was the belief in the intelligence community, in most of the intelligence communities all over the world. Missiles were known, the cooperation on missiles were known, and other arms, but nuclear was something that was believed to be out of cooperation between Iran and between North Korea and Iran, and Syria, Libya, and others. Of course, the case of the Syrian reactor proved that there is no limitations on the side of North Korea. The desire to have money and economic support, if it's oil or food, is beyond any limitations, and therefore today we should look upon North Korea as country that will sell, if it's needed, any technology that is relevant as well to the nuclear realm. I want to say about Iran, if we look on the past relations of the last decade, there were two very interesting North Korean politicians, the same one in 2012 and in 2017. In 2012, it was the head of the judiciary system. He is believed to be the second in the political hierarchy, and he signed a technical, scientific agreement with Iran that is very similar to the agreement that was signed with Syria and was the background for the nuclear reactor that was built by North Korea in Syria. Now, the common knowledge, I would say, in the world is to believe that when Iran is looking upon the case of North Korea, the main conclusion that it draws is that since North Korea has succeeded to have nuclear weapons and demonstrated its capabilities, this is the ultimate secure card for the regime for his future. And what is believed to be is that when Iran is looking on North Korea, they would prefer to be in the same situation. But Iran is not there. Iran doesn't have nuclear capabilities, still doesn't have nuclear military capabilities, and probably is not very close to that. Might get in the future, but it's not very close now. So if we are looking on the three last decades of Iranian behavior in the realm of their nuclear program, one would say that before Iran there stood two models, possible models. One is the Japanese model, the other one is the North Korean model. The Japanese model means getting all the aspects of the nuclear cycle and the knowledge how to have a nuclear device, and getting to the position, to the political position and the technical position of a nuclear threshold state, and leaving the decision to the time when it comes. The decision to break out and to have a nuclear device or to stay as a threshold country. The other one meant a breakout to military capability, nuclear capability, alienating the international community, the NPT convention, and being willing to sacrifice the short time that was needed in order to get to the first device. When I'm looking on Iran and on its policies, I would say, and some Iranians have even expressed it, they decided to go on the Japanese model. Iran was promoting its nuclear program as a civilian program, as a peaceful nuclear program for many years, had an explanation to everything it was doing in the fuel cycle. And even the foreign ministry at that time in 2005, Kharezi said that the nuclear plants that we see in Japan could be a very good model for Iran. He said it publicly and explicitly. But no question that in Iran there were and there are today many people that believe that Iran should have taken the North Korean path and not the Japanese one. In 2016, when North Korea had its first nuclear explosion, the Iranian newspaper close to the leader has endorsed the the North Korean event, saying that it is something that could be relevant also for the Middle East. I would mention in brackets that the head of the Quds Force, the one who has replaced Soleimani, is someone who has been in North Korea, and someone who has in his telegram that is associated with him is praising the technological and economic achievements of North Korea in spite of sanctions that are on North Korea from the American administration and the international sanctions. So as I said, Iran until today has decided to enhance its nuclear project in the cautious and secure way rather than the quick and risky one. The Iranians understand the difference between Iran and North Korea. North Korea is probably one of the most poor countries in the world, a dictatorship that is one of the cruelest in the world, while in Iran, people, even though it is the dictatorship, people are not hesitating to go to the streets to demonstrate. The public opinion is important for the regime, and therefore the regime has to take into account the needs of the public, the economic needs, the employment needs, and others. And therefore, Iran is much more susceptible to economic pressure than North Korea. And of course, Iran is also benefiting from the fact that it has most of its own food. It is able to produce for its own, and today it also has the opportunity to have cooperation with a lot of countries that decided not to join the American sanctions. Now, since North Korea has the possibility to attack not only Korea, South Korea, but also Japan, and in a way is holding these two countries as a hostage vis-a-vis any American attempt to attack militarily North Korea. It seems that even Iran might have, I would say, such a possibility and it showed in the last year that it is able to attack the oil facilities in Saudi Arabia. It's able to attack tankers in the Gulf, and of course the U.S. does have a lot of soldiers and navy and air ports in Bahrain and in Qatar. So in a way, Iran has the same ability as North Korea had vis-a-vis its own neighbors. But the ability of Iran to conduct such an attack without having any nuclear deterrence is very different than the one that North Korea is. And therefore, what we saw is that after the US invasion to Iraq in 2003, we saw Iran deciding to stop its military nuclear project in 2004, 2003, and to open itself to the inspection of the IAEA. My understanding is that as long as the Iranian leadership will believe that there is a credible military threat from the US to the stability of the regime, they will abandon any decision to go and break out to a military nuclear device. But having said all that, there is no question the two events that happened in the last 5 years, I would say, on one hand, the nuclear agreement, the JCPOA, and on the other hand, the policy of Trump today are encouraging the understanding in Iran that nuclear project and the nuclear military capability are good cards for negotiation and the best cards for achieving economic achievements. And therefore, we can see in both cases, even though they are so different, that the Obama administration was willing to negotiate with Iran their achievements in the nuclear project and giving them the economic achievements. And Trump today is calling them to come to the negotiating table in order to have a better nuclear agreement, to stop their advance to a nuclear capability, their nuclear capabilities, and promising them sanctions relief and even more, saying, I'm not against their regime change, I will support you to improve your economic situation. Last point that I want to mention is that since Tehran really thinks that at the end of the day, the real end game of the US administration is a regime change and not only the nuclear project, they are today much closer to the North Korean example than they were in the past. And that's the reason why for the first time I'm raising the possibility that what the Iranians are threatening, that they will leave the NPT, is something that has to be taken into account as a last resort that they can do, taking the example of the first time that North Korea have left the NPT. They had these 90 days that until what they have proclaimed will be taken into a real action, and they decided to give back and to go back to NPT at the last day. So this is an example that one should take into account that Iran can imitate the North Korean example. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sima. I'd like to transition now to Bob. And both Sima and Jung spoke about North Korea's military transfers and assistance to the Middle East, but maybe you can just elaborate a little bit on how the types and composition of this assistance has evolved over time. They gave examples of some of the customers, but it would be interesting if you have other examples. And I think even more interesting, what are the approaches that have been used in an attempt to block North Koreans' transfers to the region? And to what extent have they been successful? And I really, if you can, draw on your personal experience. In the late 90s, you were the US negotiator with North Korea on missiles, and you were in touch closely with the Israelis, with Israel. And you also led efforts to pressure other countries in the region to stop buying weapons from the North Koreans. So if you can tell us a little bit about these efforts and how successful have they been?
Shira, let me first apologize. I have a severe local internet problem. So I blanked out completely Jung's presentation, and I got maybe 10% of what Sima just said. And I'll make some remarks. But Shira, if you could signal me whether you're hearing me or whether I've cut out. But I'm getting no internet connection periodically here. So please let me know if I'm not audible.
Will do.
Okay, thank you. So for decades, North Korea has had a desperate need for revenues to sustain its economy, to support its nuclear and missile programs, and to satisfy the material needs of elites to ensure their loyalty. Now, a lucrative way to generate those revenues has been to sell military goods and services. And the most promising markets they found have been in the Middle East and to a lesser extent, Africa. And what North Korea has to offer these countries is a line of military goods, not as sophisticated as they could get elsewhere, but relatively inexpensive and reliable. And so this has been a product that's been very attractive in these regions. And the North Koreans have been willing to sell almost anything to almost anyone. Governments, as well as militant, non-state actors, rogue regimes such as Libya and Iran, as well as friends of the United States, such as Egypt, Pakistan, and the UAE. It even reached out to Israel in 1992 and 1999 to seek massive financial compensation in exchange for curbing its missile transfers in the Middle East. I don't know if any other speaker has touched on that. It's an interesting episode. I was in close touch with Israeli officials during that entire period, and perhaps we could go into it, but it was, it led to nothing, but it was a very interesting episode. So the North has been a supermarket of military assistance, with products ranging from training to military advisors, to tunnel construction, to small arms and light weapons, to rockets and missiles of various ranges, to equipment and technology for producing rockets and ballistic missiles. And assistance was not confined to the conventional domain. North Korea provided equipment and material for the chemical weapons programs of both Syria and Iran. In the nuclear realm, there are only a few confirmed cases of North Korean transfers. A canister of North Korean origin uranium gas, that's uranium hexafluoride, presumably intended for Gaddafi's planned uranium enrichment program, was found in Libya. And of course, North Korea constructed a plutonium production reactor at the Al-Kibar site in Syria. And of course, Israel destroyed that reactor before it became operational in 2007. Now, a circumstantial case has been made for North Korean nuclear cooperation with Iran, based, for example, on reports that Iranian nuclear scientists have visited DPRK nuclear facilities and even attended a North Korean nuclear weapons test. But to my knowledge, and I'd be interested to hear Israeli views, but to my knowledge, the US intelligence community has never been able to confirm Iranian North Korean nuclear cooperation. And Iran's nuclear archive, captured by Israel in 2018, apparently makes no mention of support from Pyongyang. North Korea has been a huge supplier of ballistic missiles, components, materials, and production technology to the Middle East. Among its customers were Iran, Syria, Egypt, Libya, Yemen, and the UAE. Iran was by far the largest recipient. It purchased a full line of North Korean missile products, including the medium-range Nodong, renamed the Shahab-3, which Tehran has sought to configure as a possible vehicle for delivering nuclear weapons. Recently, the two countries have been jointly developing an 80-ton rocket engine that could help boost a space launch vehicle or an ICBM. North Korea has also been a key military supplier to Middle East non-state actors, especially Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis. It has supplied these groups directly as well as indirectly via Iran. For the last 30 years, the United States has sought to stop North Korean military transfers, both to avoid their destabilizing regional effects and to deny the North Korean regime the revenues needed to fund its own military programs. It has used various policy tools, and I'll go over a few of them. One approach has been to reduce the demand for North Korean supplies. The United States approached several countries receiving or planning to receive North Korean supplies and encouraged or pressured them to forego DPRK transfers. In the late 1990s, it persuaded Egypt and the Emirates to not to buy Scud-related equipment, in part by threatening the suspension of certain U.S. military projects with those countries if they decided to go ahead. Libya's demand for DPRK products was suspended in the early 2000s when the United States and Britain exposed Libya's ties to the AQ Khan black market network and forced Gaddafi to abandon his WMD and missile programs. Such demand-side approaches can be effective, but their effects may only be temporary, as they were in Egypt. In 2017, the Trump administration withheld close to $300 million in military aid to Egypt to pressure it to sever its military cooperation with North Korea. Now, this led to further Egyptian pledges of questionable sincerity, I would add, to cut off its military ties with North Korea. Of course, seeking to persuade customers not to buy North Korean goods has no prospect of success with countries and non-state actors over which the United States has little leverage. Unfortunately, those are among North Korea's best customers. The second policy approach has been to impose sanctions, especially U.S. unilateral sanctions, on companies and individuals involved in North Korea's military proliferation activities. But sanctioning North Korean entities has limited practical effect because they don't rely on the international financial system, at least not in their own name. They get foreign nationals and companies to operate on their behalf. Sanctioning third-party banks, companies, and individuals that assist North Korea's illicit marketing and sales efforts can be more effective. But both the Obama and Trump administrations have occasionally sanctioned third-party entities, but foreign policy equities may sometimes make Washington reluctant to impose sanctions against friendly countries or countries like China, where stopping North Korean proliferation competes with other US priorities. Another policy tool is interdictions, relying mostly on intelligence information to intervene either at the transaction or the shipment stage to block illicit transfers. Security Council resolutions provide legal support for interdictions by banning imports of North Korean arms and authorizing UN members to inspect cargoes suspected of containing illicit North Korean goods. The United States and Israel, operating independently or in cooperation, have had notable successes in stopping North Korean transfers to the region or Iranian transfers to its regional partners. But such successes depend on precise, actionable intelligence, which will often be unavailable. A fourth policy tool that has been tried, although without lasting success, is negotiations with North Korea. The United States has been involved in a series of these negotiations. Most negotiations, from the 1994 agreed framework to the failed 2019 Hanoi summit conference between Kim Jong Un and President Trump, have focused on North Korea's indigenous capabilities, mainly its nuclear capability, not on its exports. 1996 to 2000.
Bob, we're losing you.
It doesn't know that we are losing.
Right, but maybe the audio works and not the video. Okay, until Bob is back with us, we have quite a few questions from the audience, but I do want to maybe, and quite a few of them are for you, Jung. I wanted to ask something because the Trump administration's, the U.S. strategy toward North Korea, it uses what they call a maximum pressure, which includes this, the strategy to bring North Korea back to the negotiations. Oh, Bob, you're back.
צריך לו את המיקרופון.
Yeah, I'm back. I'm just about to finish. I'm terribly sorry. My internet just went down again. So I was saying that progress had been made on the missile export ban, but we're far apart on limiting North Korea's indigenous missile programs when the Clinton administration ran out of time. There's a lot to say about that. I was directly involved during that period, and we can discuss it later. So today, I'll just sum up. Today, U.S.-North Korean talks have reached a dead end. I'm sure Jung has talked about this. And even if they can be revived in the future, the likelihood of achieving sound, verifiable agreements is uncertain at best, in my view. Taken together, these various policy tools may, to some extent, impede North Korea's missile proliferation activities in the Middle East. But stopping those activities, especially given North Korea's extensive and highly sophisticated illicit proliferation network, is very unlikely. Again, my apologies for participating only intermittently in this discussion, but thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Bob, and I hope your internet doesn't act out when we get to questions for you, but I'll start with Jung maybe. And I do want to talk about, the U.S. policy here is key, what they're calling maximum pressure. It uses a sanction strategy to bring North Korea to the negotiation table, and we've heard from, I think, three of you that it's reached a dead end. One key part of that is China, North Korea's #1 trading partner, has loosened its enforcement of sanctions. And my question to you is how, in your assessment, the new, or not the new, but the growing rivalry between Washington and Beijing that some people call the new Cold War will affect the strategy vis-a-vis North Korea. Another question from the audience that maybe I can tie into this, asking to what degree, if any, is noted or assisted by China.
Thank you, and thanks to the audience, the viewer who posed those questions. How is so on maximum pressure had its origins in 2016 when the Obama administration started to place restrictions on North Korea's exports, and the North Koreans exporting of coal, iron ore, textiles, and fish. I think by at this point far outscale what they do in small arms sales. And so maximum pressure was designed to choke off all of these avenues of the regime's ability to generate revenue. And we were talking about in terms of in the billions of dollars with these exports. And maximum pressure also involved going to all of these different partner countries to try to get our friends and partners to try to put the spotlight on North Korean officials who are wandering around, lurking around these countries. They're not there to, not just diplomacy, but they're there to generate revenue. The North Korean regime has told its officials abroad to make sure that you're making money, not just to support the embassies and their stay in those countries, but also for loyalty payments to the regime. So maximum pressure was designed to try to go at all of the ways that North Korea tries to get money, to get hard currency. But with the unintended effect of the summit, that has reduced maximum pressure. President Trump, as early as early 2018, said, "I don't want to even say maximum pressure anymore." And the president has also admitted that he has held back on potentially hundreds of designations of Chinese and North Korean entities that are engaged in evading sanctions. And so maximum pressure started to erode almost as quickly as it began. And a lot of the things have been, a lot of concessions have been made to maintain the mood of diplomacy. For example, a postponement of U.S. exercises with South Korea. But I would say that, given that China is a huge factor in that maximum pressure. China, along with Russia, since 2019 has openly and very publicly suggested and advocated for a reduction or even a lifting of sanctions. They had a draft proposal to the UN on this issue. And so Beijing and Moscow have not been shy about making sure that that the sanctions are reduced for North Korea. But China has a lot. Given the fact that North Korea relies on China for over 90% of its trade. The fact that China has little appetite for cooperating with the U.S. and North Korea issues at this point is a huge. It's not a good thing in terms of trying to get North Korea to give up any part of its nuclear weapons or stopping its export of missiles. I don't see that, rather than China facilitating North Korean arms sales in the Middle East, I would say that they would be competing with North Korea in the Middle East on arms sales. Let me stop there. I see that Bob has a two-finger.
Yeah, just to add to that, on the question of China's role in North Korea's proliferation activities in the Middle East, I don't believe Chinese authorities have an interest in seeing those proliferation activities take place. I don't think they would actively assist North Korea's marketing of these military goods and services. But China has been a haven for individuals, North Koreans, other foreign nationals operating on North Korea's behalf, serving as brokers. I mean, there are many North Korean brokers who have been operating in China without much interference by Beijing authorities. Small Chinese banks have cooperated with North Korea's proliferation activities, not necessarily knowingly, because North Korea gets the support of foreign nationals to serve as fronts for their activities. So that's been a big problem. China, I don't think, actively supports these activities, but China is at fault for its lax attitude toward them. If China made a real effort to crack down on these illicit activities, in their territory, I think the problem would be on its way to being solved. China's been a big part of the problem, but not intentionally.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Jung, would you like to add? Sima, we just heard that despite the use of similar terminology, maximum pressure, but now it has changed. You can't call it maybe maximum pressure still vis-a-vis North Korea, but there is a maximum pressure strategy employed toward Iran. It seems, and maybe you can speak about that in either case, so far, the strategies have worked very well to change the behaviors of the regimes. And maybe you can speak a little bit about the differences in the maximum pressure strategies, what it has achieved and what it hasn't in Iran. And this may be, I'd love the opinions of our other panelists. If not maximum pressure, then what?
Yeah, I think the issue of maximum pressure on Iran, when we use this term, we relate to the years of Trump. But we have to remember that this strategy started also within the days of the Obama administration, combining the pressure on Iranian economic trade, relations with the outside world, the SWIFT system of transfer of money, etc., as a tool to bring Iran to negotiation and to compromise. So this understanding of the need of the regime to have economic achievements vis-a-vis his own people was understood also during the years of Obama, and it seemed, I don't know if this is the only reason, but it seemed that the Iranians came to the negotiating table with the Obama administration 2013, and then concluded the JCPOA in 2015, because of their willingness to try this channel of negotiations as a way to get a relief of sanctions and to start again to bring all their money that was frozen outside of Iran and to start exporting oil in the numbers and that they have done before the sanctions. So this system of connecting between economic pressure and a compromise on the nuclear project was already used and was the background for the JCPOA agreement. Now, when we come to the Trump administration, he decided in May 2018 to leave the agreement and not to be any more part of that, and immediately to bring back the sanctions. Now, the difference now is that on one hand, it is much more effective from the point of view of what the US is doing in order to make sure that Iran does not have connection to any company, any bank, any security, any entity that has its own interest in the US. But at the same time, and it is different from what was during the Obama administration times, the other parties in the world, is it the Europeans or Russia or China, are not part of this agreement on sanctions. Now, of course, the American economy is such an important one that no one in the world that has any interest in the US would dare to do business with Iran. So from that point of view, the US alone can put a lot of pressure on Iran, but that's not enough. The Iranians are finding ways to sell oil, not in big numbers, of course, lesser and lesser than it was years ago without the sanctions, but still they have their ways to trade with other countries, with other small companies, and it is different from what it was before. Now, is it enough? No. For 2 years, we are now in May 2020, and we are celebrating, in brackets, 2 years for sanctions. Iran did not decide to come to negotiations. And our estimation is that until the elections in the US, they will not go to any compromise with the Trump administration. They will have to calculate, of course, after the elections, whether it is the second term of Trump or it is a new new president. That would be a very important element in their calculation of how to promote or not promote any negotiations with the Americans. But as long, for the time being, there is a huge suffering in Iran, a huge huge economic huge economic difficulties, and the situation is worse than it was before. But it didn't bring the ultimate goal. It did bring Iran to negotiate a new agreement, a better agreement. And therefore, the question, as you have put it, Shira, is what are the other tools that the US can use vis-a-vis Iran? I must say that they are limited. The US does not have an alternative strategy vis-a-vis Iran. It's more and more pressure, which might, at the end of the day, after a period of time, might be such a damaging to Iran that they will decide to come to negotiation. But it didn't happen till now. And the only thing that is missed now, and I don't think will be there on the table, is a credible military option if Iran passes any kind of, I would call it red lines, even if they are not determined as red lines in its nuclear project. Trump administration, as far as we understand it, doesn't have any interest in getting into wars in the Middle East. On the contrary, he wants to get out of the Middle East, and Iran also understands it. So as long as there will be no credible military option, only the economic pressure, I think, will not be enough.
Thank you, Sima. Bob, Jung, if you want to add to that, sort of beyond maximum pressure, where are we heading?
I just wanted to make an observation that I thought was interesting when Sima was speaking about whether Iran will take the Japan model or the North Korea model. I thought that was an interesting framing of what kind of path Iran would take. And it occurs to me that what's different about Iran and North Korea is that what I think one of the main differences and one of the key differences, as Sima has pointed out, and I would add this, and it's that Iran doesn't see nuclear weapons, as far as I can tell, as a part of its identity or its brand. Whereas North Korea, the Kim Jong Un regime himself has been at pains to incorporate nuclear weapons into its legal framework, into its culture, into its songs, into all of the crevices of national life that has been infused with the nuclear weapons program. And so from my perspective, that makes the North Korea part much more difficult to denuclearize North Korea, given the fact that nuclear weapons are such a big part of Kim's personal brand, but also the country's national identity. And I don't see that happening with Iran, although I take Sima's point that because of some of the policies of the Trump administration over the past 3 years, that Iran might be even more defining itself as a nuclear power, or that they're closer to that North Korean model. So I find that to be a fascinating look at how different regimes look at nuclear weapons.
Thank you. And Bob, what is there?
Just to add to that, Shira, I heard part of Sima's presentation, and I think I agree with her. I mean, Iran clearly had a nuclear weapons program that's well documented. I think, though, in 2003, they decided to defer a decision about whether they wanted to take this nuclear weapons development program to fruition. I think that's where they are today. They've deferred it. They've insisted on keeping their nuclear weapons option open. They will insist on keeping that option open. That's why they are not going to eliminate their enrichment program, which is an embryonic nuclear weapons program. They will absolutely insist on that. But I think we have the ability to shape Iran's perceptions of its national interest and to discourage them from moving to weaponize their nuclear program. Let me say something about maximum pressure. Maximum pressure is absolutely essential if we want to negotiate acceptable resolutions on either Iran or North Korea. But it's only one part of the problem. Maximum pressure has to be linked to a realistic negotiating position if we want to achieve anything. I think Iran is under great duress now, and now added to it is the pandemic and the low oil prices and all the rest of it. But Iran is not going to, give up its nuclear weapons option altogether. And the Trump administration has adopted, I think, a very unrealistic maximal approach to negotiating objectives, and these objectives, these requirements are things that no Iranian government could accept. And we have a similar situation with North Korea. North Korea is under great pressure, less pressure than Iran perhaps, because it has a very successful sanctions evasion plan, and it has those who will cooperate with it. But it is under great pressure. But the Trump administration's approach initially was early and complete denuclearization for reasons that Jung probably explained that I didn't hear, unfortunately. Kim Jong Un has no intention of giving up his nuclear weapons capability. It's essential, he believes, to the survival of his regime. And as long as the Trump administration held to this maximalist position of complete denuclearization, it was not going to succeed. I think subsequent to the Hanoi summit and in working level talks in Stockholm in the fall of last year, I think the administration adopted a more realistic step-by-step approach. But by that time, I think North Korea has lost interest. Kim Jong Un has said he's no longer interested in negotiations with the United States. And I think at this point, North Korea is waiting out 2020 and we'll wait till the November presidential election before deciding what to do. The only issue really is how provocative it will be. It says it's no longer bound by its moratorium on nuclear weapons testing and ICBM testing, and it's now proceeded in a carefully calibrated way only on short-range missiles in the hope of not alienating Russia and China and not being too provocative and eliciting a firm U.S. response from the United States. But I think prospects for negotiation either on Iran or North Korea are essentially nil for the remainder of this year.
Thank you. We have a few minutes before I'll transition to Amos Yadlin. We have a few audience questions. Sima, this one I think is in particular for you, but also for Jung. Bob, in his presentation, was skeptical of the possibility of ongoing North Korean and Iranian cooperation on nuclear matters. And we have someone in the audience that's curious to hear if you agree with that assessment.
Thank you. I think there is, first of all, we don't have, and I agree completely with what Bob has said, we don't have any confirmation, good confirmation to suggest that there is a cooperation, a real cooperation between Iran and North Korea on the nuclear project. Now, the information that was that I also referred to, that the Iranians were participating in tests, nuclear tests that have been done in North Korea. I don't know if it's correct. As far as I know, there is no confirmation to this information. And I think in following Iranian behavior, I would think that the Iranians will be very hesitant to be seen in any way cooperating with North Korea on the nuclear issue, because everybody knows North Korea has a nuclear devices, the military nuclear project. Iran is trying to present itself as a country that didn't have, will not have any military nuclear ambitions, only peaceful nuclear projects. So I think this combination with North Korea on this issue could be quite harming for the Iranians, and I think they will be hesitant to do it. That doesn't mean that they are not trying. If there is something that they need, something specific that they need, any material specific or something that they can smuggle from North Korea, I assume they will do it. But otherwise, they will be very hesitant.
Thank you, Sima. And before we transition back, just a quick question. We have audience members that are very curious about intelligence capabilities. From what you can say, to what extent does Israel follow North Korea?
I would say that one sentence about that Israel is following very, very deeply Iran. So if North Korea is doing something with Iran, probably from that angle, we will know what is happening there.
Thank you, Sima. And we have a similar question also to to Jung and Bob, to the extent that you can tell us what are the Western, the U.S. intelligence capabilities in North Korea. And there's another question that, speaking about new tools and technologies, a few months ago, the U.S. government had come down hard on 2 Chinese nationals for allegedly conspiring with North Korean state-sponsored hackers to steal millions of dollars worth of digital money from cryptocurrency exchanges. And if you think there's a possibility North Korea is trying to disguise its activities in the region, in the Middle East, using Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies.
Just briefly on intel efforts on North Korea. You know, North Korea is one of the hardest targets and one of the hard targets that the U.S. government focuses on. Iran is the other one, and so there is a great deal of attention and resources devoted to these targets, especially given North Korea's nuclear weapons program and Iran's ambitions and the potential for destabilizing activities in both regions. And I think what Sima has said, really resonates with me, that Israel is very much focused on Iran, and it really underscores, the absolute critical importance of the U.S. having allies and partners all around the world, and to maintain those relationships and maintain those networks, so that because we're stronger together in terms whether it's collection capabilities or an analysis, and I think that is really a critical role that that our partners make along with the U.S. Government agencies in targeting these targeting our adversaries.
Bob, I don't know if you have anything you'd like to add to that.
Not really. We have three excellent intelligence analysts, former intelligence analysts here, Jung, Sima, and Amos, whom we haven't heard from yet. You know, was involved in Israeli intelligence. So I'll leave it to them.
Great. We'll transition to Amos in 1 second. I just want to ask one quick question to Jung. You didn't speak about it here today, but in your article and presumably in your book, you do discuss the importance of restoring the position of human rights special envoy to North Korea, which the Trump administration canceled in 2017. And if you can just tell us why you think this is important and what are the prospects for restoring this position?
Yeah, so I do mention that in the book, and that's and the human rights component was a big aspect of a component of my article in Foreign Affairs, but it's also a big part of the book, Becoming Kim Jong Un, that was released, that was on sale as of April. And I believe that, you know, we do ourselves a disservice by relegating or marginalizing the human rights issue as something that's supplemental, or something that is not necessary or critical to the nuclear mission or the national security mission. At least in the North Korea, on the North Korea issue, human rights absolutely needs to be a part of our pressure campaign. You know, the North Korean government has a network of gulags, prison camps, labor camps designed to repress the people, designed to make sure that fear is a part of the culture. And I think we're not going to get anywhere on inspections or verification or on denuclearization if the regime if the regime does not loosen its restrictions on its people. How do we talk to nuclear scientists in North Korea? How do we talk to North Koreans themselves about various North Korean capabilities to verify anything? So I think human rights has to be a part of our work on North Korea, not because not because of the nuclear imperative, but also because it's the right thing to do.
Thank you, Jung, and I think those words resonate very well also here when we're thinking about Iran, a more comprehensive strategy and a bigger goal. Thank you, Jung, Bob, and Sima for an illuminating discussion. I'd like to hand it back to INSS Executive Director, Major General Amos Yadlin, for some closing remarks.
Good evening, everybody. I'm very glad that this round table or square table of two very respected think tanks, Brookings and INSS, is looking today at the story of North Korea's role in the Middle East. And the most interesting issue about it is that we don't know everything. A lot is still under the cover of the ways that North Korea is behaving and operate in a very secret, concealing way. But we can go into the history and remember that North Korea sent squadrons of MiG-21 even 50 years ago. In 1973, they had a squadron in Egypt. By the way, December, after the war, December 6, I think, two North Korean MiGs were shot down by an Israeli Air Force, Phantom F4, and maybe by an Egyptian SAM missile that had some friendly attack on their North Korean help. But I want to go to the strategic level. And the strategic level of North Korea is affecting the Middle East, sometimes by hardware, but not less by ideological and doctrine and concepts. And North Korea basically, first of all, is ideological enemy of the West, of United States, and it was on the other side to Israel and the United States during the Cold War, and then after the Cold War was over, they choose the side of the rogue states, Iran, Syria, Libya, and others. So ideology against the US is a leading pillar in the North Korean activity in the Middle East. Second, and this is more on the defense military side, asymmetrical approach. The North Korean was the weak side against the superpower. So they have developed artillery vis-a-vis Seoul, and then huge army, and then a threat on the civilian population. They are not playing with the same rules of engagement. They are not accepting the just war theory. Then by tunneling, then rockets, terror, and the cherry on the cream is WMD. So asymmetrical approach leading to another pillar, which is deterrence. And by asymmetrical tools, you deter the stronger power that you are facing. And once again, it started in Seoul, then Japan, then continental United States. So extended range of their deterrence and much more powerful tools. And then we come to the Middle East, proliferation without limitations. Anything you can proliferate, you do. Starting with rockets and airplanes, and then missiles, technology, and then missiles themselves, and at the end, once again, chemical and nuclear weapons. So let me speak a little bit about what Shira asked me to speak, and this is the lessons from 2007, when North Korea delivered, as Sima said, turnkey project to Syria. And this is the difference between Syria and Iran, because Syria didn't have any nuclear, scientific, and industrial capabilities. So the idea that Syria is developing nuclear weapon seems to be something out of the blue, which is not exist in the early 2000s. And nobody predicted that they will buy secretly a nuclear weapon. Because after the 1981 destroying of the Iraqi nuclear reactor, nobody thought about the plutonium track as something that they can do covertly. Centrifuges, somewhere in the basement or in a tunnel, yes, but nuclear? And here comes the North Korean way of concealing, cheating, find innovative way how to proliferate their nuclear program. And the way of concealing it was by avoiding any signals of what they are doing. No air defense around, not even a fence, a mechanical fence on the ground. Seems like an innocent agricultural facility, warehouse. And the idea to build a nuclear reactor under a civilian a building, industrial building, was a North Korean very innovative idea. The fact that the US and Israel missed it for a couple of years has to do with how we share the war. Israel is looking very carefully at Syria, and the US is responsible to look at North Korea. And nobody on both sides of the ocean was able to do the connection that was there until we finally found it. It was a big surprise to the American intelligence. And as chief of intelligence at that time, when we shared it with the Americans, there were three questions that they asked. Are you sure it's a military nuclear reactor? And we had very good evidence to convince them, and they agreed. What is the time that it will be operational? Which was very important to the question of what you are doing about it. And then what will be the consequences of an Israeli or American decision to destroy it? We shared the intelligence, we agreed about the intelligence, but when you agree about the intelligence, you don't always agree on policy. And Prime Minister at that time, Ehud Olmert, being less than a year after the second Lebanese war, didn't want Israel to go to another war because of the need to destroy this nuclear reactor, and he asked the Americans to do. And surprisingly enough, when President Bush called his advisors, nobody supported that America will attack another Arab Muslim country after Afghanistan and Iraq. And at that time, suspicion in intelligence in America was very high, even though the intelligence approved what we have brought. And then Israel decided to do it, and the goal, the policy goal, was no core, no war. How to destroy the nuclear reactor without without deteriorating into a war. The next issue, and this is beyond 2007, was the question that was asked here in the panel: what about a similar project in Iran? Syria is close. Syria is not a huge territory. It's a small to a medium country, and Israel is covering it very well. Iran is huge. Iran is far away. And the fact that even after 13 years, the conventional wisdom is that there is no cooperation between Iran and North Korea on the nuclear issue, every head of intelligence have to assume that he is not seeing it, but it is there. They must continue look for it. The conventional wisdom is that Iran doesn't need North Korea, because very much like in ballistic missiles, they have learned the fundamentals 10, 20 years ago from North Korea, but now the student is not less capable than the old professor. I would like to suggest that it's a must to continue and look to cooperation between Iran and North Korea, because it is so natural, politically, geopolitically. North Korea, in a way, is a model for Iran. How to achieve deterrence against the US, how to behave in all their rogue behavior without being punished. And they really want to achieve the North Korean capabilities without paying the North Korean price. Because Iran is much more dependent on their international relation and trade and education, and they don't want to be isolated the way North Korea is isolated. But it's all the time considered in Iran how much they are willing to pay to be the North Korea of the Middle East. And for us, and I will end with that, it is very important to learn the lesson from how North Korea achieved their nuclear capabilities, how the West, led by the US, was unable to stop them, were unable to even freeze them, or and how they reach the possibility and the capability to threaten continental US with nuclear weapons. And not to do the same mistakes, or to learn the lesson how to do it differently vis-a-vis Iran, whether in negotiation or in any operational strategy. I want to finish with thanking you, Shira, for handling this very interesting and I think educational panel. My old friend Bob Einhorn, my colleague Sima, Dr. Park, and everybody who helped make this event so successful. Thank you.
Thank you.